Okay, and now I'm going to open the meeting. And the attendees will start coming in.
Give just another minute to let those that want to hop in to the meeting pop in, and then we'll get started maybe in about a minute. All right, it is 6:05. So we're going to begin this evening's meeting. In compliance with the governor's orders, tonight's meeting will be held virtually. So thank you to everyone for being here tonight, and to those of you watching on YouTube and in the live streams, thank you for tuning in. If we could call the meeting to order at 6:05 and do the roll call, please.
Yes. Sorry, Kim.
Here.
Partha.
Here.
Hilpern.
Here. We have a short agenda by list, but we have a couple of important topics. The first one is an action item for the minutes. So we're asking for the Finance Committee recommend that the minutes of June 1st, 2020 Finance Committee meeting be approved as presented or as amended. So we got to tap into our long-term memory here to think about those.
Second.
Great. Kim.
Yes.
Partha.
Yes.
Hilpern. We're having some connection issues.
I am. Raphael, you want to bring us up to speed on transportation?
Right. Thank you, Joey. In anticipation of what school is going to look like this year, we've been in conversation all along since school was ordered closed by Governor Pritzker. And if you remember, we just reached an agreement, a transportation contract with Positive Connection. And based on the feedback that we received from the board, when we presented the recommended contract to the board, we added a language that required that in case school doesn't open in person, that we actually engage in conversation with Positive about if we're going to be paying them if they don't transport our kids, which we did in March up till the scheduled end of the school year. So we've been talking to them, and we will revisit that if we don't start in person for extended period of time. And even now, we know we're going to go remote till the 29th, which will be a savings from the cost of providing transportation. That will have been at the beginning of the school year, August 24th. So we're in conversation with them. We'll see what that looks like. And we're also in conversation with Zoom Transportation. That is the firm that provides out-of-district transportation to our students. And with them, what we did last school year, we actually didn't pay them anything, as well as the taxi providers. Since they didn't work, we didn't provide them anything. So that's where we are. We've also been talking to Positive Connection to make sure that the cleaning of the buses aligns with the guideline that we've seen with the CDC and Illinois Department of Public Health. And we feel comfortable that they would do that. Some of the things they've agreed to do is make sure that their drivers wear masks and they social distance on the bus, that the seat right behind the driver is always left unoccupied by our students, that our students have assigned seating, that each of our buses also have a bus aid on them. And currently the regular buses have the capacity of 72 students. We would do no more than 25 students on each bus. Each of these students would be on just one seat per student, except when you have students who are family members, they can share seats. So we've also been looking at different scenarios as far as trying to schedule the daily school opening and dismissal in a way that allows us to be able to minimize the cost of transportation. So we want to put safety first, but we want to do it in a prudent way where the 2.7 million or 2.2 million that we provide the board, when we talked about what school would look like, I think 2 weeks ago, we're trying to manage through by not getting to that, but at the same time providing safe transportation for our students. So that's where we are. So with what we've done so far, if we were to do double routes, whereby we drop off one set of our students, and then we have about 30 minutes to 45 minutes to drop off the second sets of students. What we're looking at, instead of the $2.2 million, worst case scenario that we talked about a week or two ago, what we're looking at now, we're looking at about $750,000 additional expenditure instead of the 2.2 million. And that also assumes that every one of our bus riders who rode the bus last year will be riding the bus when school reopens. So we've been working behind the scene to see what transportation is going to look like. We've been focused on safety and also been focused on making sure that we do a good job in being financially responsible with how we do that. That's where we are.
Thank you, Raphael. Has the transportation department resurveyed families who typically take the bus to see if that's something that they want to continue doing?
I believe we did, it was part of the overall survey that has been done. And what we see is, it looks to be, as it stands right now, about 50% of the folks who ride the bus last year are saying they'll ride the bus this upcoming school year.
So there's a chance that we can decrease the overall volume of need as well, at least for the beginning part of the year.
More likely than not, I believe that's what is going to happen, because I think a lot of our family and parents are, just because of the virus, they're just skittish about, if they have the option, I should say, of being able to transport their children to school themselves, I think they will avail themselves of that opportunity to do that. So that will have a direct impact on the cost of transportation, which I would say positive impact financially, cost of transportation.
Great. Any other questions from my board colleagues? Rebecca?
Yeah, so my question is, in the case that we don't come back, there is a clause that we would continue paying for transportation. Is that similar to what we did in the fall, as far as just covering salaries? And if we don't end up using them at all, then what does that entail?
I think what happened in the spring, we followed the directive given by the governor's office, because everything happened so suddenly, unplanned. But I think in this case, everyone has had an opportunity to kind of see what the possibilities are. So I'm thinking what we will have to do, we have to go back from the scratch, if you will, and have a conversation what the reimbursement would look like if we decide to go that way. We want to be careful in recognizing that for Positive Connection Evanston, we are the only client. So we don't want them to go out of business. I think that's very important. But I think so we have to then look at what the fixed costs are, just like we did in the spring, and make sure they can carry on that fixed cost without making any profit off of us. So we have to go back and have some really deep conversation with them and come up with something that benefit the interest of the district and the community, and also ensure that Positive Connection doesn't go out of business. So we have to walk a fine line, if you will.
I appreciate
And just another add-on to that, was there conversation around delivery of equipment or meals as part of the contract? And would that be, let's say that our students don't come back to school campuses and we have to continue the meals that were delivered, that were delivered to community sites? Is that still the approach that we would anticipate taking if we need to do that again?
Yes, food service, we've been planning with the understanding that if we don't come back in person, we will have a schedule, just like we planned, whereby our students and family will receive free lunch, reduced lunch, will be afforded the opportunity to pick up lunches at designated sites. We have that ready and geared up to go.
Any other questions? I wanted to add just kind of a compliment, Raphael. As we look at transportation on the whole, planning for the fiscal conservative nature of it is critical, but you have to balance that with the possibility of full use as well. And people who today might say they don't want to use the bus can change their mind when they need to change their mind, and you don't get an advance notice of that. And that's a really precarious spot to be in, because when somebody says they need transportation, we want to be able to provide it to them. And for people who don't understand the ebbs and flows of that, I just want to say thank you, because you have to be pretty versatile in the transportation department now to make all things possible, both to save us money where we can, but still be able to run the full operation at a moment's notice. So thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to mention the decision made by this board to support Positive Connection seems to have borne fruit. Based on the conversation we've been having with them, we actually met on Wednesday, last Wednesday. They have a full complement of folks that were on their employ in the spring. They all have expressed an interest in coming back. They had a meeting with them about a week ago. They've actually even signed additional drivers who are willing to come drive for the district. And the critical reason for that is they've increased their salary. The minimum salary used to be $15 an hour. What they've done, they've actually raised that to $19.50. So they have a lot of drivers who are willing to come drive for them now. That was not the case before. So I think that, and the fact that we supported them, and by making sure we provide their fixed cost, has helped make the transition possible for when we are ready to go back for in-person instruction. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second discussion item of the evening is the District 65 tentative budget for the 2020-21 school year and the joint agreement for the operation of Park Schools tentative budget. So Kathy, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for sharing that presentation in advance.
Can you see my screen? Can
Yes.
everyone see my screen? Thank you. Dr. Horton, Raphael, do you want to begin the conversation with your comments, or do you want to wait until I present?
I think the one thing I would just like to say is this has been a budget year unlike any. and I've been in this line of work for a while. Normally, you have an idea of what the year is going to look like, what your revenue is going to look like, for the most part, through your collection rate from property taxes, what the state and federal income is going to look like for the most part. But this year is a little different, and we all know why, because of the pandemic. So what we've done is, normally we get about 55% of the tax bill that goes out in the district, we collect it. 99% of the tax bills that we send out, we actually collect it. With this year, the last time anything like this has happened was over 100 years ago. So there's really no good trend that we can use to try to figure out what the collection would look like for property tax, which makes up about 80% of the revenue that we need to fund the district. So what we've done is we've tried to read the tea leaves, if you will. We've reduced the collection rate to about 95%, which is pretty low for this community of Evanston. We have a solid tax base. We have, for the most part, a community that values education, that are willing to recognize the cost of providing a solid education. So we brought that down from 99% to about 95%. And we believe, based on the economic data that we're seeing right now, that we should be pretty solid, at least for FY21, for the revenue collection rate. Now, the one area where it's sort of a wild card is where we're sitting as it relates to expenditure. Because as we've already stated, there are a number of things that we're spending money on now that we didn't anticipate spending money on. We're spending more money on remote learning. We're spending more money on technology. We're spending more money just instructional material that we can use remotely. So it's a lot more cost. And we're also spending money on PPE, which is something we never thought we would have to do. So the expenditures side, we're going to try as much as possible to watch what we spend and make sure that our spending is in line or even lower than what we anticipated. But I just want to share that out there, that it's going to be a tricky year financially for us. But we're going to do everything we can within our purview to try to make sure things work well. And we manage the district's funds in a prudent and conservative way.
I would like to say with this, before we move forward, Kathy, I will jump in from time to time on key pieces as you're presenting, but also knowing that this budget, it is a trying time. It's not, everyone is aware of that. But I would also like to recognize that we have prioritized 3 key pieces on this budget that will continue to resonate. Number one, we're looking for health and safety. There are resources that we're spending. Equity is something that the district has charged me with and has been charging the community for quite some time. So the funding is there. And then also highly engaging support for students, not just academic, but also social. So that will bleed out throughout the entire process of this budget. So thank you.
Thank you both. And I just want to say that we did present a draft tentative budget in June. The numbers do not look that much different in the tentative budget, but we recognize with the unusual situation with pandemic that the numbers will probably change in the final budget because we may have to reduce our estimate for revenues and increase the expenditure side. So this is the presentation overview. We will be talking about legal requirements for legal adoption, why we do it every year. We will briefly touch on last year because actually the numbers have changed slightly since you saw them in June. We will talk about estimate for FY21 budget, both revenues and expenditures. We will talk about joint agreement Park School. Financial projections for FY21-26, they are updated. They have been updated. And very important, financial sustainability. How do we manage to come out better on the other side with the extreme situation we are in. And we also will talk about budget uncertainties. So why do we do it every year? District 65 is a governmental entity. By law, we have to have our budget adopted at the end of the first quarter, which is on September 30th of this year. So we will be putting budget on display on our website for 30 days. We will have a public hearing, and during the same meeting in September, we will adopt the budget, which will be filed with the county and with the state. So how are the numbers looking for FY20? They actually, under their circumstances, looking well. I don't remember during my tenure the year when we collected 100% of revenues. It's always close 99, but 100% is unusual. Actually, all of our revenue sources were collected at 100% except for one. Other local sources which collect fees, childcare, fees from parents, interest income. There are a lot of revenues in that category which will not be collected. Some will be delayed, like student fees, but again, we will be probably adjusting that category as the information becomes available.
Kathy, if I can jump in, and the reason why this happened is the timing of the pandemic. The second installment of this year's taxes were due in March, and it was due just before we closed, which explains why we were able to get the big chunk of our property tax, and we were able to get 100% of it. It was the timing of it, of the fact of when schools were closed. We had already collected the rest of the tax revenue. Thank you, Kathy.
So yes, the time was fortunate for the district, and actually we collected 102%. And you may wonder, if you look at the numbers, why we collected 102%, 2% over the budget. And it's because of the adjustment between the non-operating funds and operating funds. Every year, the levy is paid out over 2 fiscal years, and every year we reconcile the levy. And this year there was more funds from the non-operating funds that we actually had to journal move to the operating fund. So there was a positive adjustment for our operating budget, but that's why we are showing additional funds collected above the budget. Again, not anything extra that the district collected, but simply how we allocated revenues to our funds. On the expenditure side, we underspent by 1%. We spent 99% of the budget, and it's primarily because of the COVID and stay-at-home order and school closure. There were some savings, as you heard from prior discussion, with transportation and other areas of our budget. So overall, we actually did slightly better than our budget. We budgeted 5.5 million surplus, and we ended up with 7.1 million. Those funds will be saved. They were saved, they were preserved, and they were added to our fund balance. So this is the same information, just more visual form. On the left side, you see blue bar, budget, red bar, actuals. You can see that we have a positive variance. Again, additional funds primarily because of the property taxes, which made up for the losses in other local revenues. And on the right side, another positive variance, underspent expenditures because of COVID-19. Moving to the budget. So FY21 is our 19th consecutive balanced budget. In comparison with what we presented in June, we have slightly bigger surplus, $500,000. The numbers are very similar. Previously, we reported we were estimating 700,000 surplus. We will be using that surplus to offset additional revenue losses and unexpected expenditures. And our student enrollment is projected to decrease to 7,339 students. And again, we'll be adjusting these numbers in September when we update our enrollment with actual enrollment numbers. So just echo what Dr. Horton said, our spending will be in line with our instructional and strategic priorities, primarily commitment to equity, and also making sure that the delivery of instructions is during the time of pandemic meets the expectations of our families and students. Moving to the budget figures, to the revenues. So because of all that, the revenue estimate is a negative one. The revenues in this year's budget, FY21, will decrease by 1% from the FY20 actuals and FY20 budget. And it's because primarily what Raphael mentioned, we adjusted down the collection rate from 98.5%, which we use historically, to 96%. So the CPI factor, which is built in, it's a CPI from 2018, 1.9%. We're not going to feel it. Actually, it's going to feel like a tax freeze because our property taxes are actually decreasing in comparison with our actuals and even with last year's budget. We will also see a decrease in other local revenues. Some of the revenue categories, like the interest, will stay down for a while. We actually cut the interest estimate by half in this year's budget. Childcare fees. Right now, as it stands right now, and we will have school. We are planning to have a hybrid model, and that's the reason why we have hybrid childcare fees in our budget, but they are reduced. And same thing goes for lunch sales and for other fees. And we will be revisiting these fees again next month as we're building, actually this month as we're building the final budget.
Kathy, if I can jump in too, please. So I just wanted to focus on the other local revenues. It's probably going to be lower when we bring back the budget to you in September, because we collect a lot of money for childcare, and we also collect registration fees that ordinarily we get a chunk of that in May and June of last fiscal year. We haven't collected as much as we will. So, and it's a very good chance we're probably not going to collect as much as we've done in the past, because especially if we start out with remote learning. So I just want to point that out there. So the revenue, the other local revenue is probably going to go down a little more when we bring the budget back in September for final approval. The other part that I want to point to is the federal fund rate. The interest in income that we get is pegged to the federal fund rate. And if you've been noticing, that rate has been going down precipitously. We were fortunate in that the timing of the closure, we had investment that were locked in then. So that's why we didn't see as much of damage to last fiscal year as we'll see this year. And some of those investments would then expire this year, this fiscal year. And when they expire and we reinvest our money, the rate of return will be substantially lower than what it was last fiscal year. I just wanted to point that out because I think it's very important. So when we come back with a reduced level of other revenue, we know why that's the case. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you. The reason why we're not taking investment income even more is because we have several investments maturing in August and September. So we will be booking that interest from those investments in that year. If the situation of the national COVID-19 situation does not improve next year, we will have to bring down, reduce the investment income even more in the following fiscal year. But that's the reason, I'm so sorry. Oops, that's the reason why we cutting it in half versus 75%. We at this point, what we're hearing from the state is that they are promising us full payment of state revenues. So I don't think we're going to be reducing state and federal revenues. If anything, we may increased by additional federal stimulus funds. This version of the budget includes only 700,000 of federal stimulus fund. That's what we were promised. That's what we got confirmation on. The total amount is 800,000, but 100,000 will go to private schools. This slide illustrates our operating revenues. Again, you can see, you've seen this slide over and over many times, that we rely heavily on local property taxes. Almost 80% of our funding comes from our community. And this slide illustrates the history of the CPI, Consumer Price Index. What we have for for calendar year 20, that would be the December of 2020 CPI used for the 2021 levy is 1.5%. And I would say at this point that this is optimistic, even though that amount represents the average. We've been using the average to calculate future levies. CPI at this point is 0.6%. And according to our estimates, it will probably be even lower than that, maybe something closer, 0.4, 0.3%. So that's the increase that we'll be using to increase property taxes in fiscal year FY23. So we know what we're getting this year. We know what we're getting next year. What's unknown is FY23. With school districts, the economic impact is delayed by 2 years. So we don't feel it right away. We feel it really in 3 years. So we have a little bit of time to get ready, even if that CPI is flat, is zero. In 2008, as you can see on this slide, CPI was 0.1%. Again, we have 1.5, but it will probably change and we will probably look worse.
Yeah. So Kathy, if I can jump in again. So last month in May, CPI came in at negative 20 basis point, negative 20 basis point. So in June, it came in at a positive 60 basis point. Now, if we annualize that number from the beginning of January to where we ended in June, the best case scenario is we're looking at CPI of just 30 basis points if the year were to end down. So I think it's highly likely that we're probably not going to get that far away from that unless we just see a significant bump in inflation between now and December, which is only about 4 months away. So I just want us to prepare ourselves based on what Kathy just said is going to impact us in the next couple of years. It's going to impact us pretty hard as far as revenue is concerned.
And then in addition of FY22 fiscal year 23, it will impact all the subsequent years. So all the revenue that we lost, I mean, we're not going to get it in the future years. So this is the visual of we comparing this slide compares budgeted revenues to actual revenues, and you can see where exactly we are losing revenue next year. The tall bar is property taxes. We are projecting to collect less in corporate personal property replacement tax, which is a tax our businesses pay. With the businesses closing, filing bankruptcies, idle hotels, they're not going to be paying. So what we have in our budget, we have a 25% reduction. But again, this information may be changed and updated in the next month. Expenditures. So expenditures are projected to increase by 4% from FY20 actuals and 3% from last year's budget. And we have really 3 areas of increase. We have staffing cost due to salary, contractual salary increases, and also additional positions. We have net 10.7 new FTEs. We have higher costs of transportation because what we did in this budget, again, without really knowing, and we still don't know what the district will be doing. I mean, we'll be looking at the state will be looking at the COVID cases and basically giving us their guidance. But what we have in the budget is a full cost of transportation. So if let's say if the school does not happen, in-person school does not happen, that cost potentially can be reduced in our budget. And again, also depends on negotiations, on our negotiations with Positive. We have several one-time costs in our budget, PPE supplies and equipment. And I have a separate slide on the COVID-related expenditures. We have costs related to remote learning, to the new finance and HR student data management system, and new student instructional supplies. Other objects, which is park school and special education tuition, is increasing by 7% over last year's actual and 15% over FY20 budget. So next couple slides illustrates new positions. We have redefined positions. So again, no impact on the budget. We had these people doing different positions, employees doing different positions in the district. And these are 3 positions: Deputy Superintendent, Assistant Director for Student Services, and Manager of Equity, Diversity, and Family and Community Engagement. So these are redefined positions, no impact on the budget. We also have positions, new positions, which are either budget neutral, which means we either closed expenditures in purchase services or supplies. We had several of the district's functions done by consultants. And so we will be hiring for some of these functions, which is in several cases is a saving. It's a long-term saving to the district. We also closed several positions. So this is a list of these positions. I'm not sure, Raphael, if I need to be reading these positions.
Let me go. I want to say something, Kathy, about these. So I want to touch, just knowing we've covered the position that we've covered already. I won't address those unless the board would like me to, but the new ones or there were questions asked that I want to address. So starting with the Dean of Culture and Climate, I'm gonna share some information, and also Anjali, if you feel like, please jump in and share. But I just wanted to say, during discussions with administrators throughout my time transitioning in since March, as well as teachers, I've gotten emails and other communications. There are concerns about culture and climate beyond restorative practice. What has been missing is consistent support from central office around how to build and sustain a positive school culture while maintaining order, and not refer or suspend our Latinx and our Black students disproportionately. The deans will be responsible for providing the support in the following areas. We've consolidated the one restorative facilitator position. That position has now been converted to one of the deans. And then the other one is a new position. So they'll focus on restorative practice. That's focusing on student and teacher. Compassion fatigue, we know our teachers they work extremely hard, and oftentimes they are carrying the load of secondary trauma. So we want to be sure that we're finding structures to support them. Currently, we don't have that. Relationship building strategies, a lot of the work that we're looking to do around restorative, and Anjali will speak about responsive classrooms a little in a second. It requires this relationship structure. So these culture of deans will do that. Safe school planning, we're pulling our assistant superintendents to focus on our new 6 systems of instructional support. That is a huge lift. And to have them doing discipline, building culture, exclusive, in addition to focusing on those 6 instructional systems would be almost impossible. Bullying prevention and parental support. There are some other work that we will be doing with the deans of cultures. The majority of this work will be accomplished under the umbrella of responsive classrooms, which Anjali will speak about. But in addition to our deans, they will also work with each school to form some of the following student organizations that some of our schools already have, but making sure that they're uniformed and we have resources. They will work with the student council at all schools. They will work with the affinity organizations. They will also prioritize racialized trauma training in the buildings. And then also deans will complete the triannual look and feel walkthroughs for all schools. Currently, they will be providing support to schools for the Let's Get It Right work. There's quite a bit of responsibility that they will be taking on. And Andaliv, can you please chime in and speak about responsive classrooms that they will lead also?
Absolutely. Good evening. One of the key elements that was a perfect intersection and why I'm excited about this work is that the restorative practice coaches in the spring had prioritized the development of the responsive classroom across the district. One of the challenges that they faced was that in the restorative practice coaching, they ended up spending a lot of time. When I asked them how much of their time, they said 60 to 70% of their time was spent in some more, I guess you could say basic level discussions and support and coaching around classroom behavior and management. And the responsive classroom is a student-centered social and emotional learning approach to teaching and discipline. It's a research-based approach. It's also evidence-based, which is important. And it's designed to create safe and joyful and engaging classrooms and communities for both students and teachers. It also is extremely complementary to our restorative practice work. And so they had identified it as a way to help strengthen our restorative practice framework and priorities. It also fits with the work that had been developed by the school climate teams over the last couple of years. The importance of relationship building as a primary foundation for any behavior or classroom management approach is really that these relationships are the foundation. And what more important time than in a pandemic where the only thing we have left is our ability to speak with each other and really build those relationships. And so we feel very strongly, and the restorative practices coaches were very much adamant about that. The other thing related to that was just the deep support that they felt was needed. When there's the three coaches, they spent a lot of time beyond what they would argue was the scope of the work. They were very deeply engaged in coaching with principals as well as really at the district level in terms of the district level support.
And I would like to add, so I spoke to the board about our Miracles framework. That's still, it's almost completed, but I wanted to share some of the goals that actually will be in a SMART goal format when we're finalized. But part of what the goal would be to decrease disproportionate suspensions of African-American and Latinx students over a 3-year cycle, improve the equity, taxonomy, and social and emotional learning and opportunities to learn for all students. They will work with the schools to support them as well as the students, prevent and reduce episodes of bullying, and improve overall student sense of belonging, which is we're going to find out from the Panorama survey where our students sit. Improve overall look and feel of all schools. Data-rich, positive quotes, pictures that reflect the students, well-lit hallways, clean hallways, and classrooms. That's part of the support that they will provide for the schools. So I want to also go to talk about, and so the other ones, as we spoke about the One STEM curriculum coordinator. Stacy, can you share what some of the responsibilities of this respective position for just this 1 year?
Yes, so that individual is working directly in the STEM department and we have a large amount of new curriculum in the STEM department, including our K-8 math curriculum. And we had approved a 6-8 Open SciEd science curriculum as well. So that individual is supporting the new math curriculum, professional learning, and educator support. And then we are also, they're also helping to support the science curriculum in the middle school. And we're having to do some adaptations with that curriculum because moving into some of the instructional practices around NGSS as a first pass for some of our educators is more complicated in a remote environment. So it is taking some additional support and some adaptation for us to think about how we want to enact that science learning in a remote learning space.
All right. And then the other one that I felt that's important to speak about, really good questions regarding the diversity hiring specialist. This is a position, to be honest, that you're going to find it more common. It's coming into school districts now. And I'm going down to make sure that I can cover it. Give me 1 second. Oh, here we go. So right now, human resources is they're working very hard to change some of the structures and enhancing some of the processes. As you saw earlier in the presentation, what Kathy shared, that was a huge resource. The HR finance system that we did not have in place that was reliable, and it was requiring a ton of manpower or power from just our staff in order to get simple tasks completed. That is in the works now, so that will also make HR a lot more fluent. And so the accountability pieces are there. We've changed a few structures already, and Beatrice she can possibly share some of those things after I'm done. The department is one of the greatest challenges that has plagued HR is the lack of that system that I spoke about with the finance. That it takes a lot of time. The diversity hiring specialist will serve as an equity hiring representative for all district-wide hires, not just teachers. In addition, we have just applied for a $700,000 teacher residency grant through ISB. If we are awarded the grant, part of our diversity hiring specialist salary will be covered by the grant. And our grant is pretty strong. It's just a matter of who's going to be reading and awarding it based on our finances. A lot of times, Evanston will be looked at as not having a need, but we wrote a really strong grant. And if we get this, the specialist will be responsible for recruiting 20 to 30 diverse teaching candidates with a focus on native bilingual speakers to help with Betsy Rhodes and staffing there, and also Latinx and African American teachers and other minority teachers in our district to help make sure that our teachers reflect, focusing on that cultural synchronicity, knowing that students who have teachers that look like them perform better. It's research-based. Intentional focus on recruiting diverse candidates across the district. And that's just a few and some of the other unique parts. So I wanted to just take a minute to share and some of the things that we will expect from outcomes from the diversity hiring specialist are grounded in, number one, being sure that we get closer to having, we have 21% of our students are Latinx. We want to get closer to that 21% with our staff. And currently right now, we're only at 9%. With our African-American percentage of teachers at 13%, we want to be sure that one of the goals will be to get us closer to that 22 or 23% that represents our students. And then we also want to become an area school district in which that produces and creates teachers that's for us, by us. The teacher residency is really powerful, and that role will play, whether we get the grant or not, at some point, we're going to be launching a residency, and that role is going to be a key component to us moving that. And I thought those were some areas that I wanted to tackle as we were speaking about the current budget. Kathy?
I thought Dr. Horton, you wanted Beatrice to speak to something?
Beatrice, do you want to talk about some of the new structures or systems you put in so far, or we could do that another time as well?
I think you really covered everything, Dr. Horton. I think the one thing that will definitely help our department is when we have that new employee information system in place.
Okay. All right.
Dr. Horton,
Yes.
I'm John Gallagher. I'm the DEC representative for finance. Quick question for your Miracles program. Is that something that teachers can expect to get training at the beginning of the year meetings that are in services?
So thanks for asking that, John. So what we're going to do, it is basically a district improvement plan. So after the team is finalized, we will be working with our unions and also our union leaders and our union members to actually go through and walk them through what our plans are. Each one of these, this is a great question, because each one of these tenants, they have goals that are aligned, and then this will help us to better align and drive the work at the school level. So short response, yes. It's not necessarily a training. It's more about visioning and the planning that needs to take place in order to get to these goals.
Thank you.
All right, great question.
Okay, thank you. The budget also includes 1.7 million in COVID-19 and mitigation and remote learning expenditures. We only getting 0.7 from federal stimulus funds, so that million will be coming from our budget unless we will get additional stimulus funds. And let me quickly go through these expenditures. So as of right now, and again, this may change, we will be spending approximately $380,000 on remote learning materials, 150 on K-5 math online curriculum. Educational tools, online tools will cost us $140,000. Sylvan tutoring for dependent learners will cost us $89,000. The district had to purchase internet hotspots last year. That's $75,000. There are a lot of families in our school district that do not have internet. District is providing this, as well as the iPads. The cost of the iPads will be approximately $243,000. PPE equipment, that's included in our budget. We will be spending approximately $500,000 on PPE equipment and supplies. Thermal imaging thermometers will be $62,000, and additional facility support will cost the district $45,000. So altogether, close to $2 million when in COVID related expenditures.
Can I say something else too regarding this? So the K-5 math online curriculum, the pilot that we're using this year in agreement with the union, this is going to be phenomenal for our students. Stacy, I'm not sure if you would like to maybe say a little bit about that. I think it's worth giving some language.
Sure, absolutely. So we are really excited that we were able to, in partnership with the union, bring forward a new math curriculum. In kindergarten through 5th grade, we're going to use Eureka Math. And Eureka Math is under the umbrella of Great Minds. And the company as a whole has been working incredibly hard to make sure that they're bringing forward not only high quality curriculum materials. In the case of Eureka Math, it is highly reviewed by Ed Reports for being highly aligned to the Common Core state standards. And then they're also building out videos for lessons across the board to support our educators so they can be thinking about the needs of our students and meeting the needs of our students while leaning on the instructional videos that are going to be provided as part of the curriculum. Additionally, there'll be interactive PDF workbooks. We'll also receive the math workbooks and distribute those to families with school supplies so students have an alternative in the way they engage in that work. And we have training set up for our educators as we return, and then some ongoing learning throughout the year. I think additionally, in two additional pieces about Eureka. One, there's some very deep and strong parent supports and resources that are available openly and publicly on the web that we're going to make sure that families are aware of, and those are available in English and Spanish. And then second, there really is a deep commitment to making sure that the videos are available in Spanish as well as the materials. And that was one of the real challenges we were having with our previous curriculum provider, was making sure that one, we had the remote learning materials, and two, that it was going to be available to our full range of learners. So we are happy to be able to move on to this new partnership. And we really think that our educators are going to find the degree of support for remote learning as well as our families to be much stronger.
And one other piece I wanted to talk about, and Dr. Green, can you chime in a little bit about Sylvan, the tutoring that for our dependent learners, or you want me to take it?
I can add in, Doc, and you can weigh in if I forget anything, but I think what was most impressive about that particular initiative is it came grassroots. It came from being an idea that was shared with us from some community partners who were appreciative of the work and the attempts from the work in the spring, but also recognizing that they wanted to just have a little bit more support for students, our younger students, with basic skills, math fluencies, et cetera. And so we were very fortunate to work. Dr. Pitts, in conjunction with her extended summer team and learning summer program work, was able to kind of turn that over on a dime to make sure that we served close to, I want to say, 100 families in that regard.
Yes, and those families are families that come from free and reduced lunch. They struggled in the spring, and we have roughly a little bit over 15% of those students who are also bilingual. So it's been really helpful to have them in a service that I, as a parent, put my children in for Sylvan Learning, and we're excited to least to start that partnership. And I've been getting emails from the family, some of the family members that are really enjoying it and have nothing but great things to say about what their child has experienced this summer. So I thought that was important. All right. Raphael, can you wrap up with or Joe to talk about just we're going one-to-one. I don't want that to just go by so lightly. That is a heavy lift, and it was a lot of hard work to get there.
Yes, it is. In the past, what we've had one-to-one in our middle school. And as a result of the effect of the pandemic and the fact that a lot of our students now who do not have technology are doing remote learning. So instead of just doing one-offs, having family requests to have access to technology, we've just decided to accelerate the process of having one-to-one and just do that so that every one of our family and our students will have access to technology to be able to make the remote learning process more robust and more successful.
Raphael, can you add, or Joe, just a couple of comments about our discussion with some key city players around potentially trying to do citywide internet access?
Right. So what we've been doing, we know as is indicated in the budget, so far we've spent $75,000 on hotspot. So the superintendent, Dr. Horton, had been looking at ways for us to try to control this cost. So what he's done is brought together all the major stakeholders in the city of Evanston, Northwestern 202, and to try to see if there's a way we can do this at a more reduced and manageable cost. So we've had a couple of meetings. So we're looking at all the options that we can do to make this much more affordable and use less resources in the district. As a matter of fact, as a result of this meeting that we had one of our meetings last week, we were able to find out that T-Mobile actually has a program where we currently pay $30 a month per hotspot. We were able to get on that where the rate that we're paying now is actually $20 a month. So that's a substantial savings right there. So we know it's a very good possibility we will have more parents who are asking for more hotspots. So the fact that we were able to get it for a lower cost will help the district provide more without having as much significant impact on our expenditure in the district.
And Raphael, if I can add to that also is that since T-Mobile and Sprint have merged, they are willing to take all our Sprint hotspots that we already have out there and bring them down, replace them with T-Mobile and bring them down to the cost of $20 per hotspot.
Oh, thank you. All right, Kathy, sorry about that.
So another familiar chart, this pie chart represents our operating expenditures, and you can see that we are spending over 80% on staffing. Salaries and benefits are over 80%, so we are labor intense operations. This is another analytical chart, shows where we have increases or decreases in our expenditures. We are comparing it with last year's actuals. And again, you can see here this year's budget is increasing in our salary category because of these new positions and because of the contractual increases. We also have supplies also experiencing an increase because of these one-time expenditures and COVID-19 expenditures as well. Purchase services, just want to point that out, that budget is less in comparison with last year's actuals because of the prepayments that we did. If you remember, we were able to, because of the surplus, we were able to prepay workers' compensation and commercial liability insurances, as well as our contract with Aramark in last fiscal year, which really helped our budget. We would not be able to have a balanced budget without these prepayments. Also, if you remember, we removed in this year's budget, we removed capital building outlay allotment out $1,025,000 from the referendum funds that that we've been allocating since the referendum passed. Again, we put that expenditure on hold, and however, we are able to finish our building projects scheduled for this year with the bond proceeds that we sold in last fiscal year. Another chart showing that 73% of our expenditures are direct services to students. All of it is services to students. We are here because of our students, but these are expenditures in the category of instructions. So that's where a teacher, our paraprofessionals are charged, and support services, transportation, lunch services. That's the category where these expenditures are grouped. So over 73% indirect services. One quick slide on Park School. Just want to mention that the school will serve 72 students. We will have 19 out of district tuition students. Revenues are projected to increase by 1% from the actuals and decrease by 6% from last year's budget. Why are we having these decreases from last year's budget? Because last year's budget had over $500,000 in revenues, prior year revenues, which were uncollected from FY29. That's why it looks like we will be collecting less, or we're planning less. It's really the same amount, actually even more, because we are getting additional tuition students. Is just, again, the timing in revenues causing this basically this wave in our revenues, this fluctuation.
And if I can just jump in, the biggest driver of that is actually Chicago Public School. They are one of our biggest clients, our Park School. And the timing of their payment tend to be skewed. Since we're on cash basis accounting, we have to book the money when we get it. So this was some of the receivable from last year that we're hoping to get this year that weren't paid out by Chicago Public School. And
we got that money. I just want to point that out. We got that last year, was revenue from FY19, and we put in place a monthly billing process. Again, CPS is unique. Their billing system is a little bit unique, but we were able to work it out, and we getting our funding. Expenditures is increasing by 3% over last year's actual, and 8% over last year's budget. Because of the additional students, there's additional staffing. So that's what's driving expenditures at Park School. Financial projections. So using the new information that we have, we updated financial projections. We were reluctant to bring that in June. So one difference between what we presented to you in February and now is that right now the last balanced budget is this year. What we had in front of you pre-COVID in November, we were projecting to have a balanced budget in FY21 and 22 and commence deficit budgets in FY23. Because of what has happened with COVID, with economy, we are actually losing 3.4 million in comparison with these projections from February. So we had to basically adjust very quickly our expenditures, whatever we could, because again, we have contractual obligations with our employee groups. We have benefits, we have other obligations. So, but we were able to reduce or delay or prepay several expenditures. So that way we do have a deficit next year, but it's a smaller deficit. It's only 400,000. And that year also includes 1,025,000 in capital expenditures that is put back on the books Also, what we have here, and again, that will be taken out if that does not happen, is the cost shift, is the pension cost shift. If you remember, it's 0.5% that the state was calculating. And I'm sorry to tell you, but COVID did not kill that legislation. It's still out there, and it may resurface at some point. So what we're doing, and we obviously we're not putting it in the budget, but we're putting it in projections as a placeholder.
So
So
if I can go into Kathy, please. So even though we're showing deficit in the next 4 years, we're showing surplus of only 297 this year. Our plan is to make sure we are going to work hard to ensure that the surplus at the end of this year is even higher than 297. We are hoping there are certain things that will help us do that. For example, we talked about transportation. Without starting remote, the longer we stay remote, the lower the cost of transportation will be. And those will be savings that we'll be able to put in towards a reserve, which will help push back the onset of deficit spending. We also are looking at just making sure that when positions become vacant during the year, we have to really look at it critically and see if those positions needs to be filled or if we can do without it. So we're looking at only filling just critical position, essential position. And if we can do without those positions, we're hoping to take the savings and put it again towards our reserve. We're looking at other things, building operation. Some of the savings that we saw last year came from building operations, in that once we closed in March, what we did, we regulated the temperature on a heater as well as the air condition, so that we have less time for the buildings to be heated or air conditioned. So that will result in savings. So those are some of the savings that we're thinking about right now this year to make sure that we can add more to our reserve. Another savings that we're thinking about putting on there is just making sure that whatever it is that we spend money on, we'll look at a way to get it done efficiently and effectively. And if we can save money and keep the process of operating our district safe and healthy, we're looking at that. So I want to say we're not waiting till the upcoming years to start looking at efficiencies and savings. We are planning to do that this year by being very careful about how we spend discretionary funding. Another thing that I forgot to add will be consulting services. We're hoping to spend less on consulting services than we budgeted, hopefully. We're also looking at out-of-state travel. That's another example that we're looking to save money on. So there are things that we'll be working on even this year to make sure the level of surplus that we have is higher than what we're projecting right now.
So back in February, when we were projecting deficit budgets in 2 years, we thought we had a luxury of time to come up with a short and long-term plan. Right now, we don't have this luxury. So as Raphael mentioned, probably as soon as this budget is adopted, we will be sharpening our pencils to balance the next year's budget. And even though you see zeros here, and again, that goes in line with the resolution, the board's resolution from 2017, which includes the language of balancing deficit budgets with reserves. That's actually not, there is a possibility, but that's not the best business practice to use our reserves to balance the budget. So yes, technically, this table shows these zeros here that we are able to balance the budget with reserves, but that means we will be at square one. I mean, we will be in our position with very small fund balance, and again, this is not the best business practice, and the state will penalize it if we start spending our fund balance. Our rating, which is right now, we have the highest rating of recognition, will suffer because the goal is to live within our means, which means our expenditures cannot exceed our revenues. We have to live within our means. If we do, we have a deficit spending. We have a deficit budget, which is going to trigger a lot of negative things like the deficit spending plan and so on. So yes, on paper, looks like we will have referendum funds at 9 million still and FY25, but really in reality, we really should not be spending these funds. This chart is representation of that table. This shows the same thing. Gray is the revenue. Yellow represents expenditures. You can see that deficit starts right here. It starts next year, less in a year, basically, unless we do nothing. And by the way, I just want to point out that this scenario, these projections, first of all, it's good as of today. Projections change because they are based on assumptions, but they also represent things on autopilot, meaning we don't do anything, we don't interfere. And we know that's not the case because our district was in a difficult position many times, and the district has acted and it will act again. The green shaded area is our fund balance. So you can see as we experience these deficits, we are cutting into our reserves. Again, not a good business practice, not something that Raphael and I would ever recommend. And this chart again shows our fund balance, but it also breaks our fund balance into green portion, referendum reserves, and a blue portion, which is our existing fund balance. And 3 years ago, administration was charged with tracking referendum reserves. So that's the projection of our referendum reserves. So if we don't do anything, it's gonna evaporate pretty quickly. So this year, because of this additional revenues, I can say that we are on track with referendum reserves because we actually are putting aside even more. But COVID-19 is putting additional pressure on our budget. There will be 3.4 million that we will not collect this year, even more, possibly if we decide, let's say, to stay in a remote learning mode longer, and we cannot have childcare and collect childcare fees or sell lunches and so on. And this is a calculation, a rough calculation of our referendum reserves, and which basically means we started with 18.5 million. The first year we received referendum reserves, which was FY 2018. And we've been adding slowly a little bit every single year. I'm not sure if some of you remember from our previous presentations, the saving and the spending save. We are still in the saving save of our budget, but this is the last year really of adding thing to our referendum reserves. So as of right now, we are on track, but probably not for long unless we do something with our expenditures. Raphael mentioned several strategies, several things that we will be looking at to develop short and long-term budget balancing strategies. I think we have to create and communicate and adopt a culture of fiscal conservatism because the future is really unknown. Just like Raphael said, the last pandemic was 100 years ago. We really don't have a playbook. We don't know how the economy will be affected and how that will affect us. And even though that impact is delayed, but still we're going to be impacted by the pandemic and by the recession. We're actually in recession right now. So that really segues into the uncertainties that we have to deal with. And we mentioned a lot of them already: the CPI, the COVID-19, and some of the legislation that is still there, property tax freeze, as well as the pension cost shift. and possibly something could be done. If the progressive tax is passed next year, we could see a deal that the state will make, and it could be a property tax freeze, which will affect us. Because again, we struggle as it is, but it may be even worse. So these are the next steps that we have in our calendar. We will be putting the budget on our website for 30 days. We will have a public hearing on September 21st, and we will be filing our budget with the county clerk and the State Board of Education. And the next at the next finance meeting, we will show you, we will summarize for you the changes between this version of the budget and the final budget, because it will look different. You probably will see changes with revenues and with expenditures. Any questions? That's all we have.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Actually, I have a quick question, if that's all right.
Sure.
One of the things that, and we talked about this also, I believe it was last May, where some of these positions that we were talking about earlier are cost neutral. And I'm just wondering, is when we talk about those positions being cost neutral, are we looking at like some of the consulting positions that we eliminated? And if so, I mean, do we really consider that cost neutral if consulting positions are typically year to year versus new positions being a more permanent thing?
Yes, there were a lot of factors. There were positions as well as reduction in some consultants. So Raphael, do you want to chime in, or Beatrice, a little bit on that?
So what I would say is, not all the positions, we were hoping that some of the position, all the positions would be cost neutral. But I'll be honest in telling you that they were not all cost neutral, because in developing the budget, there were needs that Dr. Horton spoke about that the district thought it was just important to address those needs. For example, the need to have deans of cultures and climate, to be able to make sure that we support our students who are struggling with restorative justice, and just to, there's some things that we've needed to invest in. And those were some of those things that were one of those positions not cost neutral. Another one Dr. Horton mentioned earlier, diversity hiring specialist, that was in cost neutral. We have to add that position to it. There's always been conversation in the district about making sure that we go out and we hire a workforce that resembles the community that we serve. And it's difficult to do that while we are running HR. With this, having someone who specializes, who's 100% focuses on doing that, that gives us the ability to be able to actually put our money where our mouth is, if you will. So some of the positions were cost neutral, but there were a couple of them that were not cost neutral by design, because it was important enough in order to meet the strategic priority that was set by this district to go out and try to fill those positions.
So as I look at that, and those positions are really important, and I see where we're going with that, and I get that. But when we look at when we look at the positions that were added this year, it seems like there were a lot of positions, and it kind of seems contradictory to our steps to eliminate future deficits. When we look at those two things together, as staff, we're not really seeing how those two things go hand in hand. And the positions that you mentioned, I 100% agree. Those are extremely important positions. And I don't think anyone would argue that. But I mean, I guess our thought is that there's a lot more positions that were added for this upcoming year than just those two.
Yeah, I'll take ownership of that 100% as a new superintendent coming in and assessing the needs of the district. There are quite a few changes that needed to happen. And so as the board spoke really passionate about being focused and prioritizing reduction of our budget, there's no way some of the outcomes that we're looking to gain would happen with our current structure, the way that we had it. But I'll tell you this, there are positions or funding that for next school year will become available based on some of the decisions that was made this year. And we will, there's nothing else that we need to add on our end to move this work. So this is something that I, as a leader and in my first year, knowing that we are in this pandemic and that there's going to be some very unique needs beyond when we do return to some degree, we have to be ready for that. And so some of those decisions were grounded in it. But this is a very good point. It wasn't, Raphael was in my ear all the time about the decisions and what we were trying to do. And we had some really great discussions. But moving forward, we have the players and the positions in place that we feel that will help our teachers and our leaders, and most importantly, our students to excel in the remote setting, as well as whenever we can get beyond COVID-19.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board colleagues on the presentation? Cindy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my kind of concern is similar to what John just highlighted. You know, we have been talking a lot about the need to talk about reductions. Kathy just, I think, appropriately stated that we need to create kind of a culture of fiscal conservatism if we are going to be serious about dealing with some of these deficits coming as soon as next year. And so it's hard to square that with the list of the added positions. And I hear what you're saying, Dr. Horton, and I agree with you. I mean, it also doesn't feel like this is the right year, knowing the deep needs that we are going to be encountering with our students to be reducing staff. However, I guess, what is our timeline? And I think we've asked this question before, like, when are we going to start kind of the process of really looking at what I think will be painful reductions? And I think there will be reductions across the board. It's, yes, there will be administrative positions that I think we have to look at, but I think we're going to be looking across all bargaining units at reductions that we're going to need to really affect those numbers that we saw on the forecast. And so, and we've also talked as a board about the need to make sure that we are engaging our community and stakeholders in this conversation early on, and not necessarily just presenting a fait accompli, this is what we're going to do. But we want feedback on, because these I think are going to be significant enough cuts that will change the character of what schooling is going to look like. And so I guess just, can we get some idea of when we think we're going to be able to, no one wants to have these discussions, but I think we need to think through when we're going to be looking at
So
these.
I talked to Raphael, actually it was Raphael and Kathy. We spoke about having a couple of, having a, I don't want to call it a state of the district, but a community forum where we're going to have some open discussions with, and it'll probably be Zoom because we're in because of the COVID situation, but we will have a section where we're going to focus on budget and talk about the current state, get some feedback from community members about things that they see or ideas. We'll also touch special education. We'll also touch our equity discussion, and then also the pedagogy piece, the instruction. So those are something that we spoke about potentially as early as November to have some community discussions. But we do know there's been that we're tightening the belt. Some things that I'll just say, we had some systems internally that were kind of loose to some regard in how we were doing contracts and some of those other things, and we're tightening that up, and though that will pay off for us in the long run as well. But it is a challenge for me as a leader to not approach the decisions and the choices that we made were all grounded in equity. I don't know any other way to do that. Like if we are focused and that's a priority, I do believe that we have to put our funds what we say we value. And so that's the commitment that we've made in the direction that we're heading, but we are open to making other adjustments that we are going to address. It's going to be some tough conversations, even in areas that we felt were some of the non-negotiables is where we were leaning right now. It's just not an easy place for any of us. And I would say just at least let us work this year to move to see what kind of progress we can get under these dire circumstances for our students. And we will make change. We will be making cuts. It's coming. And that's not just a statement. I had to right the ship first before we can lay that out. I know it's never a right time to make cuts, but this is something that we are committed to it. And Raphael has also explained, I mean, the budget is unpredictable right now. There's some things that we just don't know, and we will be paying close attention to that.
That makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate that response. That makes a lot of sense. That being said, I do wonder if we can, I did have some questions about, I appreciate going through some like the Dean of Climate and Culture and some of those specific positions that I think are brand new to the board at least. So I'm glad that we could get a little bit of clarity on those. So I wonder if we could talk a little bit about some of the special education changes in positions specifically, and I don't offhand remember what the numbers were, but the trade-off of adding learning behavior specialists and reducing some of the special education paraprofessionals, and then specifically some of the changes at Rice, adding, I think, teaching assistants and reducing the behavior specialists. Can we just talk through like what those changes mean for special education services and how they're going to better support special education students generally? And then if we can specifically talk at Rice, what those changes mean for those students.
Absolutely. So you all know that special education is a priority area when it comes to equity, and there's a lot of work that we need to do. I think with our goal of increasing access to the general ed environment for many of our students, specifically our Black and Latinx students with IEPs, the more effective way to do that would be by making sure that we can create schedules where there would be access to co-teachers instead of just adding a paraprofessional. And I would say that when we looked at staffing, or when I looked at staffing when I joined the district, we had a lot, and paraprofessionals do a wonderful job. I value them; they're important to our work. But we had like over 140 paraprofessionals, and this is not including JEH, Park, or Rice. So that was a lot. And I think we saw that there were some opportunities to be more efficient in how we schedule our special educators and our paraprofessionals so that we're clustering kids in a different way. So we did some work with our principals to look at scheduling. So we were able to reduce our paraprofessionals, still make sure that we're meeting all of our IEP minutes, and add opportunities for co-teachers where we needed them at various buildings. And we were able to do that in a way we had reduced by 24 paraprofessionals, and we were able to add 12 special educators across the district. And we did that without just through attrition with paraprofessionals who resigned or left the district starting in the spring and over the summer. So I do think it's a more effective model. It will support quality instruction for our students in the general ed environment and beyond. And I think it will support collaboration too between our special ed and general educators. You asked specifically about Rice, and what was happening there, and this decision was made in collaboration with the Rice administrator and their SIT team. They were using the Rice agency staff to come over during the day to support in the classroom. And what was happening is there's lots of turnover. Sometimes staff had to stay back. So we have our most vulnerable students who really thrive and need relationships and consistency, really getting a different adult sent to that classroom every day. And it was not we tried to work with the agency to try to remedy it. It was really just not a workable situation. So instead of paying the agency staff to come over, we thought it would be better to hire our own TAs. And what I did was send out a survey to all of our paraprofessionals to see who was interested, because we wanted to make sure that we were putting paras there that have the skill set and passion and wanted to be there. And we did have some paras that were willing and wanting to make that transfer. So we did move them over there, or the plan is that for the beginning of the school year. If that makes sense. The other thing that came up when we were planning for this is by using the agency staff, we weren't able to include them in like the professional learning activities or the faculty meetings. So again, this is just another opportunity for that team to be more cohesive and work together to support those students.
That sounds really wonderful. Thank you for explaining that. And if I can just restate to make sure that I understand with the learning behavior specialists and the replacing the paraprofessionals through attrition. So really the theory behind that is that, you know, we have been a district that has kind of talked about inclusion. We kind of had an inclusion model that we never really fully invested in. So what we are talking about now, what you just described, is something that will get us closer to being able to fulfill that vision of an inclusive educational model.
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds, you summed it up.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I mean, that's really exciting and something that I know we have talked about and wanted to move towards for some time now.
And I would just add to that, just knowing that inclusion has been talked about in this district for a long time. And my understanding just from being on the committee and talking to others, you know, is, you know, that we needed a more sustainable path towards an inclusive model, and we needed to make sure that we were supporting it adequately and making sure that our educators, you know, had training and co-teaching opportunities for collaboration. And that was, we really are looking at that this year, and we've already got some good plans for co-teaching training for our educators that have already started for some. And then that was the piece of the principal scheduling, student-centered scheduling training that we did, so that we were making sure to not just plan for it, but also put some systems and structures in place in the building that would support it.
All right. Excellent. And then if I can just ask one more question, not about special education specifically, but this is just, you know, when looking through the list of, you know, where we are increasing staffing, you know, we are notably not increasing any staffing with respect to health clerks or nurses in the district, which is notable this year only because obviously we are dealing with a global pandemic and we are talking about potentially a return to in-person schooling. I know we're talking about in September, you know, even if it isn't then, at some point, hopefully, you know, the idea is that we will get back into school, but we will be getting back into school still with a heightened, you know, atmosphere around health concerns. And so we're not increasing that staffing. Can you explain how we are partnering, or whether we are partnering with the city of Evanston, with some of the local health organizations to try to, you know, because if we do go in person, obviously we're going to be doing screenings, we're going to be doing temperature checks, we're going to be doing all of these things that you would seem to need increased health personnel in the buildings.
So if I can take that, we recognize that. And what we've been trying to do, we've been trying to balance the need to be fiscally responsible to making sure that we take the health and safety of our community, our staff and our students into account with all the things that we do. So we've been meeting very regularly and working with the City of Evanston Department of Health. And for example, they are the ones that we're going to work in partnership with very closely as it relates to contract tracing. So they'll work, we've set up a system of doing that so that they'll work with us and they'll help us with that. And we've also reached out to some of the resources that we have in town. We've reached out to some of the epidemiologists who are affiliated with Northwestern to help us with understanding what the scientific base is to work around making sure that we keep our community and stakeholders safe in the district. So we are doing that. So we've been creative in working with resources without us necessarily having to go out and hire a bunch of people. We recognize that if the time comes when we will need additional personal resources, the approach that we thought about taking is getting nursing consultant. Because as we are talking about here, if we hire a bunch of RNs right now, And then next year, if there's immunization or vaccination for COVID, and we have all these people on staff, then we have to talk about laying them off after just a year of work. So what we are trying to do, we're trying to be smart, we're trying to be focused, we're trying to be creative in making sure that we are not compromising the health and safety of our staff and students, but we do it in such a way that doesn't add undue burden and stress to our financial position as a district.
One other creative idea, and this hasn't come to fruition yet, but our new health services director, Bernice Judd, is trying to and has had some conversations with some universities, so like U of I, where they have nursing students that could be partnered with some of our nurses or RNs, and it would be a win-win because we would have somebody else to help monitor the room, not administer meds or do anything like that, but if they were paired with an RN, that could potentially free up health clerks to go support other places. So just so you know, like we're really exploring a lot of different options to make sure that we have the support we need for our health services department and the inevitable extra support that might be needed when we return in person.
Thank you for that. And I think that's a really great creative idea. So thank you for bringing that to the table. And I do want to, even as I ask the question, I do think it's important to note that, a school district, this shouldn't be necessarily the kind of thing that a school district, if we had appropriate national leadership, these aren't the kind of questions that we would need to ask. But because absent that, unfortunately, that's a burden that is a school district that we need to take on. So, and I also do want to highlight that I'm asking specifically about nurses and health clerks for, related to COVID-19. But obviously we know that an additional health concern is around mental health issues for our students. And I did notice in the budget that there is increased staffing for social workers and psychologists. And so I think that is really important that we are also thinking about the mental health of our students in that way. So thank you for that. And with that, I have taken up a lot of time. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Suni.
If I could just
John?
backtrack real quick to something that was said just a few minutes ago about our inclusion model and the reduction in parapros, but then the increase in special educators. First of all, as a teacher, I'm going to say I love our parapros, and I know that was echoed with administration too. I love our parapros; they're great. I know that the work that they do is sometimes underappreciated. Not pointing at fingers, just saying that they're not valued as much as they should be. With the increase in co-teaching that the inclusion model that we're talking about brings, I know for DEC it's important because historically what I've witnessed in the buildings is that sometimes there's not enough time for them to collaborate. There's not enough time for them to plan. And I just hope going forward, and I mean, I feel like our administration is very responsive, but I just hope going forward that's something that we think about. If we're going to have these added opportunities, then I hope we give them the time to plan to make those opportunities successful.
Thanks for that, John. Absolutely.
My only comment about the budget presentation goes back to Suni's initial point. And I'd like to pose it to my board colleagues of us committing some time this year, talking with Raphael and Dr. Horton and having some maybe additional finance committee meetings dedicated to the topic of understanding positions, understanding roles, understanding how some of the investments are impacting our school community, so that as we get towards a decision and a deadline that we need to also set, we are informed as much as possible to make those decisions. And I propose we do it under the structure of a finance committee meeting, so that these are conversations and education we take open in the public can attend. If we're not doing Zoom, if we're in Zoom, they can watch it, but that it's something that we can co-educate ourselves along with the community and see common information, but have it be outside the regular business of the finance meetings, where we also are voting on things as a matter of routine. And I just think that we have a large budget. We do have a lot of new roles. We have a new leader. And I think it's important for us to try to synchronize ourselves before we make big decisions. I look back at the proposed cuts in advance of the referendum passage. Seems like yesterday, but so long ago. And our community will be engaged. They will be inspired to share their voice with us and with educators around what they value. And we have to find a way to curry that energy into this process so that it isn't something that is against or people fighting, you know, for their one thing, their one slice of the pie, but rather we're trying to advocate for as many children as we can and for a system that's as healthy as it can be for as long as it can be, as a part of our stewardship of the tax dollars. So I'd just like to propose that we do that this fall, try to find dates to set a calendar for ourselves as board members to have some of these discussions and set a deadline by which we want to consider ourselves as educated on the topic as possible in advance of decision making. I'll take
Thanks,
nods.
Joey. I like that idea. I
Okay.
think that I'd definitely like for us to take some time to look at how we can be flexible with our board calendar to get some time to set aside for this. I agree with both you and Sunny's inquiry about the fact that we've been talking about this for several years, and at this point we need to just do it. And so I like that idea as a proposal for how we set aside time for both us as well as our community to engage more deeply into digging into what we are going to do about this, because at this point we're running out of runway. Other folks?
Yeah, so I already sent some of my questions, and I just want to take just a moment to express this concern. I know that there's the nice to have new additions that we would like for our students and for our school district at large, but as I think about how long we've been delaying this and seeing new positions being added and the needs that that we have long term, I just I feel like there has to be opportunities for creative solutions to meet what would be nice to have versus adding more people to our expenditures. And so that's something that's of extreme concern to me. I know it is to our other board members. And while I know that it's nice to have these additional bodies, I wonder what creative opportunities we have to maybe merge responsibilities for people that we already have on board, that know our culture, that are very well versed and trained in our equity work, and that could potentially save us money. While the positions that are being proposed are cost neutral for now, in the long term, they're not. And so that's just something that, as a person that rents in this community, I think about it, because I think about the affordability of Evanston and how these positions are going to impact what Evanston looks like, not in 3 years, but 4 or 5 years. And in terms of our equity work, I think that we have to think about the livability of Evanston as a whole and the expenses that we make, and the new people that we bring on board. So I know that I sent some questions just as suggestions for finding creative solutions, but for me, that's something that we were supposed to have started, and I know that we've had all these obstacles to get us to doing that work, but I think that Joey's idea is fabulous, and we should really start having those conversations as soon as possible.
Then I'd like to propose that by the next finance meeting, we'll find a way offline to coordinate what dates might look like, to what kind of rhythm might look like to have some of these conversations and move forward. And we'll bring that to the next finance committee meeting, which is scheduled for September 14th, 2020. Are there any other questions?
Just quickly, I wanted to again thank the our colleagues at Central Officer sharing all of the budget information for FY21. And again, I agree with Joey and what you're recommending. And what really excites me as part of the conversations around the budget and given COVID, right, is creating these opportunities and forcing us to work with one another, right? Forcing the city of Evanston, forcing us to, District 65 and 202 to strengthen our relationships and really leverage each one another's resources in order to best serve our students and their families, right? So, what'll be exciting from those meetings that occur as we learn about all these positions and how they impact us. And I also want to make sure that we are really exploring and really digging into how we're leveraging Northwestern, how we're leveraging the city of Evanston, how we're leveraging 202, our foundations, Evans Community Foundation. Again, all of these wonderful resources that, again, have contributed and can contribute even more, I think, to bettering the outcomes of our students and their families.
Thank you, Sergio. Well, if there aren't any other questions or comments, I'd like to adjourn this meeting at 7:49 p.m. so that we can jump into our working board meeting. We do have in the FYI a list of bills from May and June, the fee collection updates, and the monthly CPI factor list.
Thanks, Joey. I'd like to move us into our working board meeting. In compliance with the governor's orders, tonight's meeting will be held virtually as we just held our finance meeting. And Adila, can you do roll call? Adila, you're muted.
Halpern.
Here.
Kim.
Here.
Hernandez.
Here.
Lindsay Ryan. Mendoza.
Here.
Cartha.
Here.
Tanya Vudi.
Here.
And I think Lindsay Ryan, maybe she just didn't hear.
We
okay.
can't hear you.
Oh, we've got it. Okay, good.
All right, and Sula?
I move that the Board of Education approve tonight's meeting agenda as presented.
Second.
Great. Halpern.
Yes.
Kim.
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Lindsay Ryan.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm switching screens. Mendoza. Cartha.
Yes.
Mendoza.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Halpern. Did I already do you?
Still yes.
Tanya Vudi.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So the next item on our agenda is a district update. We have some board statements. Dr. Horton, would you like to start off?
Yes, I would just like to start off to say that our team has been working extremely hard over the last few months with working to design a plan that satisfy and meet the needs of our students. We're factoring in the multiple stakeholders from all of our union representatives, represented our parents, our community members. There are so many different factors as we were using to design our return to school. There's been a ton of work, and I just want to thank everyone. I don't know if we say that enough. It is, or hear it enough from me. It is grueling. We've been battling. We've been crying. Everything less than fighting we've done to work to try to get a plan together. And again, there's no perfect plan, and you may have heard me say this before. There's no right plan, but there's definitely a wrong one, and we want to be sure that what we put out and what we move forward with is something that we all can live by and that our students could benefit from. And again, knowing that, I just want to be clear that we are prioritizing in our design our students who are free and reduced lunch, special education, emerging bilingual, McKinney-Vento, and any student who struggled during our spring learning. I'm hoping that that's clear. And it just happens to be that the majority of our students are who are in free and reduced lunch are Black and brown. And so that is the position we want to just share. It's really about providing that support for them for our in-person return with guidance through ISB. And it is, there's been the community itself has been very supportive of us, but there's been just a lot of evilness, a lot of racist and privileged individuals who have been harassing, for lack of better words, the emails of myself, the deputy superintendent, our board president, and I just wanted to say we will not be intimidated. We will continue and move forward with our mission. So, thank you.
Thank you. And in that same vein, I have a statement to read, an open letter to read on behalf of the board. It's prompted by an inflammatory and mischaracterizing story that was put out by Fox News. And prompted by that, we've been receiving mischaracterizing and racist emails, including direct threats toward board members as well as administrative leadership, specifically Dr. Horton and Dr. Green. And to that, we've written an open letter as a collective to make it clear that we stand tall on our values as a board and we will not be detoured. And Sergio, did you want to also make a statement before I dug into the open letter?
Absolutely, yeah. Nomás queríamos compartir como una junta directiva de educación aquí en el Distrito 65 que tenemos una carta abierta para responder a los ataques racistas que hemos recibido sobre correo electrónico, que fueron un resultado de una noticia que salió de Fox News, de Noticias Fox, que también no reportó muy bien el trabajo que estamos haciendo aquí en este distrito escolar. Entonces, vamos a leer esta carta abierta para responder a esos ataques. Anya, go ahead.
So my internet connection is a little unstable, so I'm going to turn the video off, but I'm going to read the statement on behalf of the board. It's our open letter in response to racist and threatening messages that we've received. As a board, we have decided to share the content of one of the letters that we received recently in order to help our community understand the moment that we are in and the options that are in front of us. We know there are many in our country committed to equity, in our community committed to equity and ensuring that our most marginalized students are prioritized because of the legacy of racism and white supremacy has made their educational experiences unjust. We need to move beyond discussing these realities and take decisive action to rise to this moment and demonstrate our commitment to these values. We want to share by addressing the specifics of this letter, or we want to start by addressing the specifics of this letter. It's important for us to contextualize that the views expressed in the letter are part of a continuum of resistance to equity and desire to maintain white supremacy that we see in many forms in our district. While few people in District 65 employ the tactics that we have seen in the letter that I referred to. to speak about board members and our identities and purposefully attempt to pit us against each other using racist tropes. We do see numerous examples of folks in our community raising similar concerns, albeit less inflammatory language. We want to be clear that when you challenge policies and protocols established to ensure an equitable experience for Black and Brown students in the myriad of ways we have seen, you are aligning yourself with the type of people who write us threatening and racist letters. Your efforts to express your discontent with policy and practice by suggesting that leadership is not transparent, is incompetent, or not thoughtfully considered all aspects of the plan are often part of a larger narrative that prop up white supremacy and attack our Black leaders. We have experienced white supremacy's effort to undermine Black authority and leadership in our district numerous times, and we need to identify how people employ what they believe to be benign strategies that work towards the same end in this letter. We believe it's helpful for us to catalog the problematic aspects of the letter that we received so that we can illuminate the reality of what our commitment to equity requires from each of us. Our role as board and cabinet necessitates that we navigate questions, requests, and advocacy that often have racist and white supremacist underpinnings. However, we are not the only ones that are responsible for creating and maintaining a community where racism is repeatedly challenged. We hope that every community member can identify and challenge the ways in which other versions of the letter that we received, using different language but working to the same ends, are brought to the board and our administration. Our path forward depends on all of us using our voice in every space we occupy to challenge the ways our current systems continue to produce disparate outcomes based on race. To be clear, the letter that we received was racialized from the start. It was not addressed to our entire board. It was addressed to one member in an effort to weaponize a racist narrative that has been utilized for generations between Asian and Black communities. Throughout history, those with the most power have encouraged and facilitated distrust between marginalized communities so that their focus is not on the root of the problem, the unjust power structure and inequality created and maintained by white supremacy. The author of the letter we received intentionally tried to activate anti-Black racism through their letter. Despite our consistent and continued language about the numerous categories of need that will be prioritized, including Black and Latinx students, the author's focus is to imply that only Black students will benefit. He vacillates from one bigoted talking point to the next, attacking Asian and white board members as race traitors because we support prioritizing the needs of Black and Brown students, targeting members of color that are not Black by suggesting that they should not trust our superintendent and deputy superintendent to serve anyone who is not Black because of identity politics. He also sprinkles in some homophobia to add fuel to his hateful fire. He mischaracterizes our collective prioritization of Black students as discrimination rather than what it is. Wholly inadequate attempt to recognize that Black students have been harmed by racism and disenfranchisement in epic proportions, and we should take every action possible to eliminate that harm. He utilized a multitude of despicable strategies in an effort to undermine our superintendent and deputy superintendent, suggesting their leadership is part of a larger racial vendetta and falsely identifying their advocacy as grounded in hate, when anyone with a mindset towards justice and equity for children and families can see it is grounded in love and commitment to children and education. To suggest that the efforts to address racism and inequality are themselves acts of discrimination is a common tactic. It is used regularly, and yet we as a community must recognize it for what it is: a total misunderstanding of how racism and power work. We must challenge these feeble attempts to make false equivalents and be steadfast in our understanding that actions taken to dismantle the power racism has in our institutions are not the same as the racism that caused the disproportionality in the first place. After the attempt to assassinate the character of our Black leaders, the letter uses violent imagery and veiled threats to suggest that evil that exists is the evil of our inaction, our unwillingness to challenge and check Black authority. This type of letter is intended to terrorize and intimidate. We want to state unequivocally that our board is not choosing a path of inaction, that we are actively supporting efforts to meet the needs of the most vulnerable in our community. We need to make difficult and sometimes unpopular decisions to, at minimum, reduce the disproportionate harm this pandemic is causing and understand how the pandemic is exacerbating the generational impact of income inequality, racism, and white supremacy that has embedded itself in our school system. It is dishonest to say that we are all experiencing the same pandemic. Our worries and fears are radically different based on our economic stability and whether we have the additional burden of racism and police violence impacting our decision-making. Those vastly different experiences can cause us to have completely different priorities and completely different set of options and tools available to us. We are all concerned about our kids, but we must be careful about creating false equivalents because the range of harm for our children is vast and the impact this pandemic is having on all of us is not the same. We stand with our superintendent and cabinet as they engage in bold action to both address the historical reality of the opportunity gap in our district and how this pandemic could exponentially worsen the problem. We are grateful that all options have been on the table as we reimagine what our schools can be for our students, teachers, and families. In the face of COVID-19 and the previous conditions that our superintendent clearly identified as a pandemic of inequality, racism, and classism, we must utilize all of our tools as we strive to dismantle ineffective and unjust systems. This letter will not be an isolated incident. Doing substantive, meaningful equity work will continue to be met with resistance. We ask that you join us in rejecting the attempts to distort reality and perpetuate racism and distract from the task at hand. We need our community to stay focused and undeterred in our commitment to equitable outcomes for Black and Brown students. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and read this open letter and statement in Spanish. So, como junta directiva para ayudar a nuestra comunidad a comprender al momento en el que nos encontramos y las opciones que tenemos frente a nosotros, hemos decidido compartir esta declaración en respuesta a algunos correos electrónicos que hemos recibido recientemente. Sabemos que hay muchos en nuestra comunidad comprometidos con la equidad y con garantizar que nuestros estudiantes más marginados tengan prioridad porque el legado del racismo y la supremacía blanca han hecho que sus experiencias educativas sean injustas. Necesitamos ir más allá de discutir estas realidades y tomar medidas decisivas para estar a la altura de este momento y para demostrar nuestro compromiso con estos valores. Queremos comenzar abordando los detalles de algunos de esos correos. Es importante para nosotros contextualizar que las opiniones expresadas en esta carta son parte de un continuo de resistencia a la equidad y en un deseo de mantener la supremacía blanca que vemos de muchas formas en nuestro distrito. Si bien pocas personas en el Distrito 65 emplean las tácticas que hemos visto aquí para hablar sobre los miembros de la junta directiva y de nuestras identidades e intentar deliberadamente enfrentarnos entre nosotros utilizando temas racistas, vemos numerosos ejemplos de personas en nuestra comunidad que plantean preocupaciones similares, aunque con lenguaje menos provocador. Queremos dejar claro que cuando usted desafía las políticas y protocolos establecidos para garantizar una experiencia equitativa para los estudiantes de raza negra y Latinx en las innumerables formas que hemos visto, usted se está alineando con el tipo de personas que nos escriben unas cartas y correos electrónicos como estas. Los esfuerzos de usted por expresar su descontento con la política y la práctica al sugerir que el liderazgo no es transparente, que es incompetente, que no han considerado cuidadosamente todos los aspectos del plan, a menudo son parte de una narrativa más amplia que apuntala la supremacía blanca y ataca a nuestros líderes negros. Hemos experimentado los esfuerzos de la supremacía blanca para socavar la autoridad y el liderazgo negro en nuestro distrito en numerosas ocasiones y necesitamos identificar cómo las personas emplean lo que creen que son estrategias benignas que funcionan hacia los mismos fines que estos los correos electrónicos. Creemos que es útil para nosotros catalogar los aspectos problemáticos de esta carta para que podamos iluminar la realidad de lo que nuestro compromiso con la equidad requiere de cada uno de nosotros. Nuestro papel como junta directiva y consejo requiere que exploremos preguntas, solicitudes y defensa que a menudo tienen bases racistas y supremacistas blancas. Sin embargo, no somos los únicos responsables de crear y mantener una comunidad donde el racismo es desafiado repetidamente. Esperamos que cada miembro de la comunidad pueda identificar y cuestionar las formas en que otras versiones de estas cartas electrónicas, usando un lenguaje diferente, pero trabajando con los mismos fines, se entregan a la junta directiva y a nuestra administración. Nuestro camino a seguir en este trabajo depende de que todos usemos nuestra voz en cada espacio que ocupemos para desafiar las formas en que nuestros sistemas actuales continúan produciendo resultados dispares basados en la raza. Para hacer el correo electrónico que recibimos desde el principio se le dio un carácter racial. No estaba dirigida a toda nuestra junta. Estaba dirigida a un miembro en un esfuerzo por convertir en arma una narrativa racista que se ha utilizado durante generaciones entre las comunidades asiáticas y negras. A lo largo de la historia, los que tienen más poder han fomentado y facilitado la desconfianza entre las comunidades marginadas para que su enfoque no sea la raíz del problema, la estructura de poder injusta y la desigualdad creada y mantenida por la supremacía blanca. Los autores intentaron intencionalmente activar el racismo antinegro a lo largo de sus correos electrónicos. A pesar de nuestro lenguaje constante y continuo sobre las numerosas categorías de necesidades que se priorizan, incluidos los estudiantes negros y latinos, su enfoque es dar a entender que solo los estudiantes negros se beneficiarán. Vacila de un tema de conversación intolerante a otro, atacando a los miembros asiáticos y blancos de la Junta como traidores raciales porque apoyamos la priorización de las necesidades de los estudiantes negros y latinos, señalando a los miembros de color de la Junta que no son negros al sugerir que no deben confiar en nuestro superintendente y superintendente adjunto para servir a cualquiera que no sea negro debido a la política de identidad. También esparce algo de homofobia para echar más leña a su fuego de odio. Caracteriza erróneamente nuestra priorización colectiva de los estudiantes negros como discriminación en lugar de lo que es un intento totalmente inadecuado de reconocer que los estudiantes negros han sido perjudicados por el racismo y la inhabilitación de derechos en proporciones épicas y debemos tomar todas las medidas posibles para eliminar ese daño. Utilizó una multitud de estrategias despreciables en un esfuerzo por socavar a nuestro superintendente y a nuestra superintendente adjunta, sugiriendo que su liderazgo es parte de una venganza racial más grande y identificando falsamente la representación que ellos realizan como basada en el odio, cuando cualquier persona con una mentalidad hacia la justicia y la equidad para los niños y la familia puede ver que se basan en el amor y en el compromiso con los niños y con la educación. El sugerir que los esfuerzos para abordar el racismo y la desigualdad son en sí mismos actos de discriminación es una táctica común. Se usa con regularidad y, sin embargo, nosotros como comunidad debemos reconocerla por lo que es, un malentendido total de cómo funcionan el racismo y el poder. Debemos desafiar estos débiles intentos de hacer equivalentes falsos y ser firmes en nuestro entendimiento de que las acciones tomadas para desmantelar el poder que tiene el racismo en nuestras instituciones no son lo mismo que el racismo que causó la desproporcionalidad en primer lugar. Después del intento de asesinar el carácter de nuestros líderes negros, la carta utiliza imágenes violentas y amenazas veladas para sugerir que el mal que existe es el mal de nuestra inacción, nuestra falta de voluntad para desafiar y controlar la autoridad negra. Estos tipos de comunicaciones y correos electrónicos tienen la intención de aterrorizar y intimidar. Queremos declarar inequívocamente que nuestra Junta no está eligiendo un camino de inacción. Estamos apoyando activamente los esfuerzos para satisfacer las necesidades de los más vulnerables en nuestras comunidades. Necesitamos tomar decisiones difíciles y a veces decisiones mal vistas, por lo menos reducir el daño desproporcionado que está causando esta pandemia y para comprender cómo la pandemia está exacerbando el impacto generacional de la desigualdad de ingresos, del racismo y de la supremacía blanca que se ha incrustado en nuestro sistema escolar. Es deshonesto decir que todos estamos experimentando de la misma pandemia. Nuestras preocupaciones y miedos son radicalmente diferentes según nuestra estabilidad económica y si tenemos la carga adicional del racismo y de la violencia policial afectando nuestra toma de decisiones. Esas experiencias tan diferentes pueden hacer que tengamos prioridades completamente diferentes y un conjunto completamente diferente de opciones y herramientas disponibles para nosotros. Todos estamos preocupados por nuestros hijos, pero debemos tener cuidado con la creación de equivalentes falsos porque la gama de daños para nuestros hijos es enorme y el impacto que esta pandemia está teniendo en todos nosotros no es el mismo. Apoyamos a nuestro superintendente y a nuestro consejo a medida que se involucren en acciones audaces tanto para abordar la realidad histórica de la brecha de oportunidades en nuestro distrito y en cómo esta pandemia podría empeorar exponencialmente el problema. Estamos agradecidos de que todas las opciones hayan estado sobre la mesa mientras reconfiguramos lo que nuestras escuelas pueden ser para nuestros estudiantes, maestros y familias. De cara al COVID-19 y a las condiciones previas que nuestro superintendente identificó claramente como una pandemia de inequidad, racismo y clasismo, debemos utilizar todas nuestras herramientas mientras nos esforzamos por desmantelar sistemas ineficaces e injustos. Estas cartas y correos electrónicos no serán incidentes aislados. La realización de un trabajo significativo de equidad seguirá encontrando resistencia. Les pedimos que se unan a nosotros para rechazar los intentos de distorsionar la realidad, de perpetuar el racismo y de distraer la atención de la tarea que nos ocupa. Necesitamos que nuestra comunidad se mantenga enfocada y resuelta en nuestro compromiso con resultados equitativos para nuestros estudiantes negros y latinos. That's it.
Thank you, Sergio. And I believe a couple of my board colleagues have statements to make during district updates as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Many thanks to Anya and Biz for your leadership and to my board colleagues for your support. Since the email was so pointedly addressed to me based on my racialized identity, I want to address my brief remarks to all the other Asian American families in District 65 who are also implicated in this email. When you hear this kind of cynical, inflammatory rhetoric, I hope you recognize it for what it is: the efforts of white supremacists to pit marginalized groups against each other in order to maintain their power. Although the email was sent to the entire board, I was addressed and targeted by name on the assumption that Asian American interests are in opposition to the interests of Black and Brown communities. I was targeted on the basis of the pernicious model minority myth that says Asians are somehow untouched by racism, thereby erasing the actual racism and barriers we face. I was targeted on the assumption of a racial hierarchy in which Asians are offered the illusion of superiority over Black people. And if we try hard enough to fit in and play along, we can have what white people have. And I was targeted on the assumption that there is enough anti-Black racism in the Asian American community that we would buy into these lies and believe that prioritizing the needs of the most vulnerable in our community is somehow taking something away from us. All of these assumptions piss me off, and they should piss you off too. Because emails like this use Asian Americans as a wedge to drive racial resentment and division. We are being goaded into doing the dirty work of propping up racist ideas, blaming Black families and Black culture for their marginalization instead of the systems and policies that perpetuate inequality and harm. Please don't fall for that. It may be easy to dismiss such a blatantly hateful attack as uncommon in our community. But this attempt to make Asian Americans accomplices in upholding white supremacy also comes in subtler forms. When white people in power ask, but what about Asians? You should be suspicious. When it's assumed that all we care about is the academic achievement of our own children, you should question that stereotype. And if you find yourself wondering why Black and brown families can't pull themselves up by their bootstraps like you or your parents did, I challenge you to acknowledge and grapple with your own internalized racism. Because there is anti-Black racism among Asian Americans, we need to recognize it and dismantle it, both in ourselves and in our communities. I don't pretend to represent all Asian Americans, nor to speak for any of you, but this email is telling me, and by extension, all of you yellow folks, as mentioned in the email, to make a choice. It's trying to scare us into complicit silence, or worse, active resistance to what is right and just. Instead, I hope you will join me in standing in solidarity with Dr. Horton, Dr. Green, my fellow board members, and all of those in our community committed to anti-racist policy and action. Despite the turmoil and violence all around us, despite the uncertainty of this pandemic, we have an opportunity in our little corner of the world to remake our school system to protect and nurture all our children, starting with the most chronically underserved. Let's choose to stand up for them together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sula. Joey, I believe you had a statement as well.
Thank you, Anya. Bell Hooks wrote that everything we do in life is rooted in theory. Whether we consciously explore the reasons we have a particular perspective or take a particular action, there is also an underlying system shaping thought and practice. In District 65, our equity work has been a journey. As a board, we have enacted policies and invested in programs that name race in and around our organization as a key component in tackling some of our most grueling challenges within our community. People do not always agree with our work. We do not always agree with each other. I do not think this group of board members or even the cabinet expect that from one another. What we expect is an opportunity to be heard, to listen, and in the end, to get the right things right. I am a white man. I'm, in fact, the only white man in this group. Over the past few weeks, this email, amongst many other conversations from people within our community, I have been offered several racial bribes to keep me in line with the white hierarchy. Racial bribes, as Gunier and Torres wrote in the Miner's Canary, are strategies that invite specific racial and ethnic groups to advance within the existing Black-white racial hierarchy by becoming white. These bribes are common throughout our society. These attempts to lure me in follow the same playbook used within the US for hundreds of years. Being referred to as a race traitor was the most explicit comment to tap into my whiteness as a reason for me to align with the commenter's position. However, the first race bribe is one that seeks to diffuse a marginalized group's oppositional agenda. This is simply strategizing to maintain the status quo, and I will not be deterred by such tactics. I was offered incentives that discourage me from affiliating with Black people. Why would I, a white man, be comfortable with the possibility that my children not be in school while others are invited in? As if my desire for my 3 school-age children to attend in-person learning should suffice for alignment with a white supremacist view of our reopening plans. You can bring your subtle traps this way, but I will not be caught in your web. I was encouraged to make sure that some of those that have the most among us are well taken care of because they are the ones that vote or post on social media. I was told that my shift in position would provide me more positive favor and therefore better status within the existing hierarchy. To those who reached out in this way, you can offer me the sun, the moon, and the stars, but my moral and ethical compass cannot be recalibrated your way. This pandemic has rocked the world in ways most of us have only seen in movies or read in books. It did not take long for race to be a major factor as communities of color dealt with higher rates of exposure, death, and healthcare barriers for treatment and prevention. To couple the pandemic with the civil unrest around yet another public lynching of a Black man at the hands of those who are charged with protecting and serving, our students and teachers are returning to a school year that we have never prepared for before. Our charge as a public institution is to build a better society through the development of educated and informed citizens who make the right decisions in times just like these. Are you struggling as my family is with the reality of childcare for the coming year? This is not the fault of a school plan, but rather a lack of a community response where city government leadership and educational entities did not get the work done to make creative solutions possible. Our educators were working to revamp their learning plans to do better remotely now that they know better. Where have the other parties been in positing the use of space around town? Are you enraged at the transportation costs due to the increased number of routes? I am too. The real answer rests in the closing of a Fifth Ward school decades ago that shackled this district financially to the need for transportation all over town in perpetuity. Are you mad that our schools are not fit with the air quality and space to be flexible to this moment? Remember that when we talk about tax levies and the need to build our schools like palaces. Our children deserve it. Are you questioning the reason for prioritizing students that need meals or internet access from school over those that do not? Schools and educators should be planning for an education, but because the burdens of food insecurity and technology access have been passed on to our schools, we are positioned to bear the responsibility for those burdens as well. Are you furious that the need to support in-learning are being prioritized in our planning? We see from Sean Reardon's research at Stanford University that white children in District 65 are the highest performing of any district in the nation, and that our Black and brown students are 4 grades behind. Should we prioritize widening that gap or decreasing it? I know that well-resourced parents are already protecting their educational privileges by hiring educators to run their little pods. The economic impact of perpetuating a system that maintains this educational gap is profound. The cost of intervening early and often is far less than the cost of supporting this need in later years. The outcomes are clear, they are known, and I will not ignore that in planning to reopen the year when not everyone can fit physically in the building. When searching for a superintendent this past year, I was clear from the outset that I wanted someone who would run full speed into a brick wall so long as it was on behalf of kids. I wanted someone who would not shy away from a fight for doing what is just, even if it means being beat down a little in the press or in the community. I know some questioned this board as we vetted our options for leadership. We found our leader, and this is precisely the moment that I was looking for. I support the work of the group, from detracking math in the middle schools to dealing with the daunting task of deciding who has first rights to the building during a pandemic. Just as the doctors have had to decide who gets the ventilators, schools everywhere are grappling with who gets teachers in-person time. As much as this is a moment to come together, we must do so by realizing that coming together means supporting a plan that has its priorities in order and does not just say everyone is equal going forward. We have committed as a board to being anti-racist. This is a binary choice. To those that are struggling to come along, we no longer have time to wait for you. As a white man, I want to state loudly how proud I am of my colleagues of color leading the board and the administration as they do the work that is needed to put those who need the care and cover most in our schools first. I appreciate that the words are being said out loud for everyone to hear and understand. Children who look like mine and live as privileged as mine do may not have a space in schools as we all want until this pandemic subsides. That is not a racially motivated decision, as some may have charged. It is the reality that race plays in our society. It is the reality that race plays in the structures that we have built. It is the underlying system that has been in place for a long time, and this board, with the work of the administration and our amazing educators, appear ready to support a change. Specifically for those who look like me and have the privilege of being male, being white, and heterosexual, it is time for everyone to be part of a solution vocally. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Did anybody else have any remarks for district updates? Okay. Thank you all. We're going to move on to item 4 on our agenda, public comment. Due to the current state of emergency, the District 65 Board of Education will be conducting virtual board and committee meetings and adjusting the method of public comments as allowed by the Public Access Counselor. Any member of the public wishing to provide comment to be read at tonight's board meeting was asked to email the board secretary by 4 p.m. today.
Great. We do have 2 public comments. I'll start with a comment submitted by the NAACP of Evanston. It reads, the Evanston North Shore branch of the NAACP has recently learned of correspondence and communication received by and or aimed at members of the District 65's school board and the new superintendent, Dr. Horton. More specifically, we learned such communication was threatening, racist, and deeply offensive, pointed specifically at board members of color and Dr. Horton, an African American. The hateful diatribe is clearly aimed at District 65's focus on a powerful and inclusive initiative to improve equitable models of education for all Evanston students. This includes lending appropriate resources to Black and Brown students who are not performing at grade level for a myriad of reasons. As we all remember, the district's 2015 academic report noted the considerable discrepancies between white and minority students, mainly Black and Latinx. Since his arrival in Evanston, and even before, Dr. Horton has shown consistent dedication in establishing processes and procedures for equity, working with the school board and wider community. He began with a task force of more than 60 persons to help the district assess steps towards reopening schools and classrooms for our community. The task force was a wonderful multiplicity of District 65 personnel and community members. The members of the task force represented the inclusivity in our town. They were strategic, evaluative, and worked cooperatively in bringing the best recommendations forward. Those persons who have sent such condescending and negative communication must not have known about the diversity or largesse of the task force. The movement of the superintendent's office and the District 65 school board has come with the overwhelming support of the task force and Evanstonians. The need to assist those who are most at risk lies at the heart of human civility and is one of the linchpins making Evanston a wonderful place to live. We are a community that cares and shares. We have acknowledged historical wrongs that have been the basis for so much discrepancy, and we are working together to address the wrongs and to chart a course for a future that is stronger, wiser, and much fairer for us all. The persons who are ranting and raving about Black and Brown children being given unfair advantages, who are attempting to paint lying and despicable brushstrokes of Black and Brown administrators and board members must not know about the heart and spirit of Evanston. We see through artificiality and we read ignorance in others with ease. We know when outside agitators belonging to venomous white nationalist and white racist organizations attempt to divide us. We are aware when such hate attempts to infiltrate and disrupt the good we seek to accomplish through the arduous effort of collaboration and building relationships. It is as easy as pointing out those who would hang a Confederate flag on one of our beaches, rip and tear Black Lives Matter signs from our lawns, and who, for the life of them, can't even say Black Lives Matter. This letter is to encourage those who have received hate mail for doing their jobs and trying to make our community a better place. The Evanston North Shore NAACP is the oldest and boldest civil rights organization in the history of the United States. We have mountains of hate mail, death threats, and assassination attempts that have accrued down through the years. Even as a local pastor and president of a small branch, I have received my share of vile communication. This is the thing. Such evil only strengthens women and men of goodwill. It only invigorates and deepens our resolve. We are determined more than ever to defeat every vestige of racism, to tear down every system of discrimination, and to encourage every person to join us. We are about building a beloved community. That in no way means a Black-only community. It means a community where all people of every shade and hue, every religion and culture are all reaching their highest level of aspirations. This is what District 65 is doing. And I go on record to thank Dr. Devon Horton, Dr. Latarsha Green, Anya Tanyavudi, and all other 65 personnel whose dedication to excellence and equity makes them the target of hatred and threats. In such a world, it is so important for us to support our heroes. A final word for the would-be antagonizers and purveyors of racism. Your hatred has no place here. Really, it has no place anywhere. You are done, but such cruelty has blinded you to this reality. Time to open your eyes. A new world is emerging. Submitted by Reverend Dr. Michael Neighbors, President of the Evanston North Shore NAACP.
Adila, I'm sorry, I have to chime in. It's time. I have to leave. Dr. Green is in charge. It's delivery time, and I thank everyone. So I'll be seeing you.
Good luck. Hope it goes smoothly.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Great. The second comment we have are from the presidents of the unions in District 65. It states, dear school board members, we, the presidents of the unions in District 65, are standing together today representing over 1,000 staff. As the joint union presidents, we appreciate Dr. Horton and the district administration for being willing to involve various stakeholders regarding the planning for the upcoming school year. We are concerned that school is starting in 2 weeks, and we are just receiving information about staff operations and remote learning this afternoon for returning to school. At this point, we are still reading through and trying to understand what has been put together by the administration. We are surprised at receiving these documents just today and learning about the impact of our members and students. This leaves us 2 weeks to meet and negotiate these changes and any implications for our work. We know that our working conditions are students' learning conditions. We want to support our students and families in the best way possible, especially during these challenging times. We are concerned about being able to get this done in such a short time. We have continually asked to partner and collaborate. We know that we have been included on committees, but we feel that the planning and decisions are being made without us. We believe in transparency and partnering. Therefore, we remain committed to working together as partners and putting the best conditions together, especially with health and safety in mind for our staff, student, and families. Signed, Natalie Copper, President of EACP, Dawn Jackson, President of ETAA, Meg Crewley, President of DEC, Dana Smalley, President of DESC, Omar White, President of ECMO. That concludes our public comments.
Thank you, Adila. Sergio?
Sure. So this is the adoption of the COVID-19 reopening plan resolution. So I move that the Board of Education adopt the COVID-19 reopening plan resolution as presented.
Second.
And Dr. Green, did you want to share a little bit with us about this action item?
I think the only thing that would be helpful to just note, I hope everybody can hear me, is we have really been trying to be thoughtful, intentional, and compassionate with the decisions that we know both our families and our staff needs to make. And we recognize and wish that we could have gotten particulars to people in a more expeditious manner, but we also own and acknowledge the information that has been shared with us. We've tried to use that very heavily, not from just CDC, IDPH, ISB guidelines, but also a lot of the input and feedback that we've gotten from the different task force and trying to communicate effectively. So these aren't excuses. It's more so a description of a process for really trying to communicate as transparently and as effectively as we know how. And unfortunately, the clock runs concurrently with those attempts. And so we just thank everyone for their continued commitment, patience. We'll own and accept the frustration as well, because even as Dr. Horton stated at the beginning of this call, it's not without our own struggle and desire for more information and more decisions. It truly represents the best thinking that we could put together with the information that we have. So thank everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Green. So to clarify, we are voting on the resolution, and we're voting on the information that we have received since July 22nd in terms of reopening school. So Adila, can you do the vote?
Yes. Kartha?
Yes.
Tanya Vudi?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Yes.
Halpern?
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
Lindsay Ryan?
Yes.
Mendoza?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Sunny, I think you have the next motion.
I move that the Board of Education approve the amended calendar for the 2020-21 school year.
Second. And did anyone from administration want to speak to the calendar at all before we go ahead and do this vote?
Just give a quick highlight.
Okay, go ahead, Beatrice.
Thank you. So I just want to highlight a few things that were in the memo, starting with August 24th and 25th, which we're going to be using as remote learning days. The district, through ISB guidance, we can have up to 5. So we chose to use 2 on the 24th and the 25th to provide additional time for our educators to prepare for remote learning. Along with that, August 26th is going to be a school improvement day. This school improvement day was initially scheduled for November the 3rd, which is election day, but Governor Pritzker changed election day to a state holiday. So we confirmed with ISB that since we had a waiver, we could move that school improvement day. So if you look at the beginning of the school year now, we actually have 5 days for educators to come back and to prepare for remote learning, and students will begin on August 27th. The other 2 pieces I just want to highlight from the calendar and the shifts that were made are that all of the Mondays that are now highlighted on the school calendar as yellow are going to be remote learning days for students, and they still count towards student attendance. So our school calendar still has 176 days of instruction for students. And the Wednesdays that we have historically had as half-day school improvement days have been removed from the school calendar. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, Sunny.
Yeah, I just wanted to get some clarity on the removal of those half-day Wednesdays. What is happening? Where is that professional learning time going? Is that now moving to the Mondays. And I guess just in general, if we can get, obviously this year is going to be very different in terms of structure for everybody, for students, for our teachers, for everybody. And so if we can just get some idea of how professional learning is going to work, how generally, I guess, particularly thinking about the DEC agreement with, student contact minutes and planning time and all of that. And I know that some of that may still be being worked out right now, but do we have any general sense of what the expectation is around where that half-day learning time is going? And so are Mondays going to be in person, or not in person, I'm sorry, student teacher contact days, or will those be learning days? What's happening?
So I can speak to that, Suni. Great question. Every Monday, our intention is for students to experience remote learning. Our first priority would be to make sure that we provide students with a human connection with a full learning experience on that day. And so after ensuring that support, we hope to create an opportunity for staff to connect for professional learning and the much needed collaboration that was mentioned to really launch co-teaching effectively, and just to ensure that our educators are well prepared and able to plan effectively. So we'd like to see those Mondays be about providing some targeted academic and social emotional supports for students, but we are still needing to work through the details to accomplish this in collaboration with our educators and with our union bodies. And so we may actually need to bargain some of these specific details. And that's something that I didn't mention before, is that we have a pretty robust plan that is around our remote learning, which is how we'll be starting the school year. We recognize the need to bargain many of the ideas and thoughts that we've tried to collectively develop in some ways, and in some ways move forward in terms of what the guidance would look like operationalized for our district. And so professional learning, one of the decisions we learned from last year is we're really trying to organize it into 3 tiers. We really want to leave space for those district topics, such as a superintendent's message, a learning of a new student information system, but we also want to be sensitive to school and position needs and educator choice. And so we're doing that somewhat from almost a shelving mechanism of containers to hold the different learning needs and the different categories. We want to, we're not at the place to fully provide a differentiated experience, but we certainly want to start setting that expectation for our educators. We know that again, that content that would be identified as district is the information that all staff would need, and that those hours would be allocated along the district learning time. And so the much of the content that would be developed is still from our various departments that will support schools in their work plans and educators in their specific roles, all working to still disrupt the racial predictability of the achievement gap. So this would be those specific learning opportunities like the sheltered instruction observation and the kindergarten individual assessment survey. So these are all things that we know are the business of school, but most importantly, that catalog also would afford educators some choice in terms of some areas of interest that they prefer. And so that would be something characteristic of like our national board certified teachers. So we're still working out the details of what the Mondays would look like, but our plan is to really make sure that students also have the learning connection while giving teachers that time to plan and collaborate together. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I fully appreciate that getting all of these details worked out is not easy. And so thank you for your continued work in this. And I appreciate for all of our educators and all of our staff that having to reimagine, what their jobs are going to look like and what, how things in the past we have bargained for, how that's going to fit into this sort of new model of learning for the year is going to be. And so I appreciate everybody working collaboratively and really thinking about what is best for our students in this very uncertain time. So thank you.
Thanks, Sunny. Did anyone else have any comments or inquiries about the calendar? All right, Adila, can we go ahead and do the vote?
Hilpern,
Yes.
Kim,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Lindsay Ryan,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Artha,
Yes.
Tanya Rudy,
Yes. All right, and Joey, you have the next motion?
Yeah. I move that the Board of Education authorize the superintendent to sign property schedule number 10 to the master tax exempt lease purchase agreement dated August 5th, 2020, and all related documents with American Capital Financial Services, Inc. for the financing of the school district's lease of technology equipment in an amount not to exceed $2,100,000.
Second.
And Stacy, did you want to?
Actually,
talk
I'll
to us
jump
about-
in there. I am
Go ahead, Rafa.
in my wheelhouse now. This is something that we do every year. We enter a lease agreement to buy the technology equipment that we need, such as computers, routers, switchers, a modem that we need in order to make sure that we have the instructional technology to be able to make sure our kids get educated well. So it's a yearly ritual. What I would like to point out that this year, we were able to take advantage of the lowering federal fund rate. So I guess it goes in one way, it comes in the other. I know I mentioned earlier that it impacted our ability to be able to get good yield on the fund reserves that we have. But in this particular case, it actually benefited us because we reached out to two banks and a finance company, and we were able to negotiate some concession from them. And the rate that was agreed to over the 4 years of the lease term is actually 1.8. I don't think I've ever financed anything, $2 million with that kind of low interest rate. So we're very excited and satisfied with that. What it's also allowed us to do is to be able to make it possible and really easier for us to go to one-to-one technology, because we're able to roll in the cost of of acquiring those Chromebooks and iPad into the lease without having to increase the lease cap that we have. So we're very excited about that.
Thank you. And it's nice to have some good financial news. Okay, Joey.
This lease includes about, correct me if I'm wrong, about $60,000 in the interest, right?
Yes.
And that is the one. That's the 1% interest rate that you're referring. 1.8.
Yes.
And at the end of the lease period, we own the technology?
Yes, we do.
The lease to own. And then what's going to happen to it at the end of its useful life for D65? What's the typical process for you?
Joe, I'll let you jump in on that one.
Sure. Some of our products like the iPads and some things that we can actually sell back and get money back from certain companies that refurbish that equipment. So we usually get anywhere between like $100,000 and $150,000 a year back the next year.
Is that also something that like happened this year? That at the end of this year, you've also sold things back?
It did.
Okay.
We've been doing that for the last 5 to 6 years now. And the most that have value are, of course, the Apple products, the iPads, the MacBooks. Those are the ones that actually keep their value.
Yeah.
Do we ever give families the option to buy any of those devices or somehow pass on the, the savings that we get for bulk purchases for a family that might want to buy that device?
We haven't done that in the past, but that's something we can look into.
Yeah, we have to look at, since we are a governmental entity, we have to follow certain state rules as far as the disposition of surplus assets. So we have to do the research, look into that, and see how we can do that without running afoul of state law.
Okay, I understand we would have to like wipe the devices, but just obtaining technology for a lot of our families is something that's unattainable. And if we're giving it to them for a duration of elementary and middle school, there's not very many opportunities, I think, that a family could take advantage of such a discount to afford this technology in their home. So as we're becoming more reliant on technology and having households with multiple students, again, it's nice to know, for the example of the high school, at the end of the 4 years, Nemi gets to keep her device. So that, they go through a process of cleaning it out, it's my understanding, but again, it's just being able to allow families to keep that technology for themselves.
If I recall in the policy language, I think we're required to at least vet the cost of the buyback, and not like that. The price would be set by how much we would expect to get in Joe's current process of selling it back. But I'm not sure that it precludes us from exploring what Rebecca's talking about. So I would love to explore that.
We will do some digging and research on that and see how we can accomplish that. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any question or comments about the technology leasing? Yes, Joey.
Not at all about technology leasing. Is it fair to assume that if I am a kindergarten through 5th grade teacher and my students are now going one-to-one, that some of those professional development days are going to be dedicated to helping me understand how to utilize that technology with them in this setup?
So we have a couple different things going on, Joey. One, we have been sending out some communications. We've sent out some options for summer professional learning. And then, for instance, there was an Apple conference today and tomorrow. There's a Google one tomorrow and Wednesday. So we're really trying to direct educators there. We also made all of the recorded sessions from the spring available to educators. And so we're making a lot of optional training available so that individuals can identify what it is that they most need. And then when we do move into the 5 days, there will be some time dedicated. Our lens is going to be first and foremost on kind of how to create, what are the design elements of high quality remote learning. And we're underneath that, people should be thinking about what tools they want to match to create that type of learning.
Awesome, thank you.
Just wanted to comment real quick in regards to that. I'm hearing that, again, there'll be training for our educators. Is there a way to, and I know it's been mentioned before, and particularly in our return to school special meeting that we had to talk about our reopening plans. But again, making sure that we have some training for parents, right? And particularly for our for your younger students, and particularly for our Latino families, if we can get that training in, in Spanish and in other languages if we can, to make sure that parents kind of just know how to navigate and help their kiddos, particularly in the early grades, how to navigate those technology.
Absolutely. So the technology team has been partnering with the family and community engagement team, and they are working through creation of some short videos that would be available in English and Spanish. Family and community engagement has a group of interpreters, and their feeling is the best way to tackle some of this is to do pairings of interpreters with families that they know have interpreting needs. And so they want to do kind of a connection to be able to help families access the resources they need. And then we're also curating the videos that are available in English and Spanish from several of our providers. Google is very good about putting out the videos, Seesaw is. And the videos that we're putting together that would work for families actually can very well work for a classroom educator to use within their own stream for students. And so we're looking at identifying videos that really can kind of stand in a couple different spaces. The final thing that we're working on is when we do distribute the devices, we're working on putting together essentially kind of a 1-pager, 2-pager that would have QR codes to trainings that families would be able to access fairly quickly on how to get up and running on the devices and how to access the learning platforms in Clever to get started.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you.
So will that replace the in-person meetings that we had for the 6th graders? We had parents have to come to a meeting. Is that no longer happening as, you know, through a Zoom platform? That's going to happen through that letter?
Yeah, so for the moment we are moving to this process because we're working on distributing devices across the district K-8. And then we will work on creating some more parent education as we go. That kind of 1-pager front and back will also most likely either include or QR code to family information on screen time, as well as ideas for managing technology within the home and balancing of learning.
Thank you. If no one else had any questions or comments, then I think that we are prepared for the vote.
Hilpern,
Yes.
Kim,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Lindsay Ryan,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Cartha,
Yes.
Tanya Booty,
Yes. All right, well, thank you everyone so much. With no further business, the working board meeting is adjourned at 9 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Well.
Good night. Be well.